And if you fall in love with, say, a person or a piece of music or a film or even a place, time seems to suspend and hold still. Mm-hmm. So the genesis of this work, or this body of work, really stems from me trying to sort of challenge our understanding and processing of time. If I were to strip out that spinal cord of numbers, what does 3 p.m. look like in the color, shape, and form? Or what does 14 hours that have passed, what is the residual carcass of that time that has moved past? And with that, I became really obsessed in 2017 looking at ephemeral objects. Like, I think all of us are ephemeral objects or beings. The passage of time in us is the process of aging. But when I thought about it in Singapore, particularly because we're on the equator and we're one of the most swelteringly hot countries, we don't have 4 seasons. We have 365 days of hot heat. That one object or material that will not last or has that passage of time being so condensed, sped up in it, is actually a block of ice. So what I ended up spending the past 2-3 years really looking into was in building blocks of pigments, frozen. I mean, they can be pigments like acrylics, inks, and dyes, and I would sculpt them in a freezer, an industrial freezer at minus 18 degrees. And ultimately, when I take them out, that's how I photograph them, or I record them on video time-lapse. So the work spread across photographs, time-lapse films, and residue paintings in the end. But the work that we have today, which is, I think, a bit laggy from my view, is Time Lost Falling in Love, and these are the time-lapse films. And when working on these, unlike, I think, photographs where the camera is such a good tool in stopping time, time-lapse videography really allows me to bend time. What is actually 15 to 18 hours of non-stop filming at a 4K grade film ultimately gets sped up in the editing suite to a 24 to 27 minute film. And what happens is actually this reverse process of how, in reality, I'm technologically speeding up time. Yeah. But the resultant effect is almost this very slow, meditative, languid fall and collapse of pigment, which it really feels like a cathartic waterfall releasing and then falling towards gravity. I love that. I think I was really obsessed with that result, the effort and the effect of what that effort produced. And with these films, I began to build the blocks quite differently in the freezer as well. I constructed them more and more like, if you think about layers of an onion, like for this particular block, it starts off really dark, and then it starts to drop and reveal brighter and brighter colors. And finally, it goes down when it gets really small to something that has a very innocent and pure and light feminine tone. And that constant flowering of time. And I think that even the title of this entire series of waterfalls, which is Time Lost Falling in Love, I was truly trying to chase that idea. You know, how do you get someone to pause and to have revelations within a pause, to suspend? I think in an age where, you know, we are a generation of Amazon Prime, everything's fast and everything's a click or a swipe or a scroll. How do you sit with something and lose yourself? Yeah. So that's that in a nutshell. And Imogen,
I think that's incredible. I'm just going to pause this, but I'm going to keep it as a background. But I wanted to just pick up on a couple of things that you said, and just a random point of connection, which I hadn't thought about beforehand. But AORA actually derives from AORA, which means now or present in Spanish. And it's actually a way of measuring time. And so it's all about that being present and how you kind of, maybe not about freezing it literally, but just recognizing each point for what it is. I've got several points on what I thought from what you were saying, especially the context of time in the past few months, even past few weeks. I saw a very funny meme on the internet about how since the start of the pandemic, it kind of feels like that awkward period between Christmas and New Year where you don't really know like what day or what month it is. And it's this idea of it just like this cyclicality. But time is also something that is incredibly important in the context of creating things in the kitchen, of culinary experience. And I was wondering, Imogen, what was it that drew you to this piece? And maybe there's something that we could flesh out about that idea of time, but also color. I have lots of different points, but Imogen, over to you.
Well, I think it's like so nice to have Dawn's work like playing just now, like as she was speaking, because I was just like mesmerized by it, which is the way that I felt initially, like when Jen first sent me the video. And I think that what I really wanted to capture is this kind of like freedom of movement and flow and like shift of the form that we can see in this process of the melting taking place. And so the dish that I created in response to Dawn's video is a semifreddo, which means half frozen. It's an Italian dessert. And just in terms of sort of what Dawn and I talked about, which I kind of loved, when you were first making these ice blocks and you were like camping out at a restaurant and like using their industrial kitchens and their industrial freezers, and we were kind of going over these similarities of like mold, like creating this ice block mold and like the ways that Dawn was doing it. But also I've experienced that in myself because I'm always like molding food into a sculptural shape or doing something like this. And I thought there was such like a unexpected crossover of like the techniques that we both do in either of our practices. So the semifreddo, which is usually made in a block shape, I kind of thought was very reminiscent of Dawn's just in terms of aesthetics, but the way more so how it melts and how there's just a lot of changing from like liquid into a solid when you're making it in the cooking method. It's essentially an egg white mixed with sugar, which is really viscous, and that's like whipped into a very voluminous, like stiff peak. And then double cream, which is also like softly whipped. And I think that there was so much that I wanted to capture in terms of like shifting from one state of being to another. And so that came up nicely in the sort of cooking method of the dish. And then sort of shows how time can be, as Dawn was saying, sort of like very transformative and depending on like sort of surroundings, or it can be intensely sort of like personal. There's a sort of lot of like heated elements and cold elements that are part of this dish that sort of like that all come together. So kind of just wanted to like capture that aspect of it too. So yeah.
I think it's interesting what you're bringing up about temperatures and heat, right? Because I mean, some of us on this call are based in Singapore or have been in Singapore. I personally lived in Hong Kong for about 5 years. And well, as soon as there's something quite, even though this is a two-dimensional work in the sense that it's a video, as soon as you see something cool, as soon as you see it moving, if you've experienced that type of humid heat, you can have that sense of tactility, right? In the same way that if you're in a colder environment, such as the UK or in New York, you will also have that other sense and maybe another relationship with that sense of cooling. And I think it's interesting how both art or food can evoke those different or trigger those different senses. So it's like that there's a sense of memory to a certain extent that you can relate with temperature, which is not something I've necessarily thought about beforehand, but there's a sense of memory. There's also a sense of emotion, I would say.
Yeah, especially with and temperatures. I feel like we think of like, okay, if you're angry, then you're hot, or like if you're excited, then you might be like sweaty, but at the same time, when you're nervous or anxious, it's like that's very cooling, or like sort of like even like a frozen like physical state to me. So it's kind of, yeah, it's interesting to bring that in.
Absolutely, like the palms. I don't know. I think like Dawn, what you were saying was so beautiful, and in a way, I maybe this is not the right term, but having that awareness of self, like that's very spiritual, right? That's having a real fine tuning with your surroundings. And I was wondering whether maybe you could expand a little bit on that, but also this idea of maybe even it's linked to the color, because I have so many questions about the colors that you select. You brought up femininity, and once again, that has this relationship with, you know, with your own being, right?
Yeah, I think for colors, I used them in a way that was very intuitive. And definitely colors to me are very emotional. So there always is like, it's like when you have what is that syndrome, like synesthesia. You see something but you taste something else, or you see something and you're feeling something else. Like a color can evoke a different sensation or emotion. And I definitely was pulling through those threads very hard in this work, especially the time-lapse films.
Yeah, and I feel that, but also maybe you could tell us a little bit about like other works that you've done. I mean, for example, for those who have been into the space, there's also another work by Dawn in the first room, and that's made out of ash. I mean, it's a completely charcoal, it's a whole different other work, but you've also done some large scale installation work. So I feel like there's this repeated sense of like the body in your, and how you will apprehend the work. And even when you're looking at this block, there's something that's quite sculptural, quite grounded about it, even though it has that fluidity. So maybe you could just touch a little bit on the other work you've done, and then also maybe the play on physicality.
Yes, I think, okay, in terms of color and physicality, I think like I've always been very obsessed in pulling two specific points, for example, solid to liquid, ultimately liquid to air, but finding that all the points in between, the ones that, and actually sometimes like if you think of colors, you have so many names or words for colors, but apparently your eyes, we can see 3 million colors that we don't even have words for. And I'm always chasing that oblivion, or that a bit of both colors and feelings that we can't quite peg down. And I think that those parts, and I think with this work and with a lot of my works that play with color, it's always the in-between that my work traverses back and forth and tries to find both a language and an emotionality off. Yeah.
I think that's really beautiful. And I'm thinking also in terms of color. I mean, over to you, Imogen, because I mean, for those of you who've received the recipe, which everyone should have, you know, I feel like the elements that you selected in order to make this semi-freddo, they're very specific. It's not just, oh, this is going to work from a taste perspective, which obviously we've spoken before about how, you know, in the same way that an image of the artwork, it doesn't lie, but also, you know, the food, it doesn't lie. If it doesn't taste good, then, you know, what's the point? But the colors that the ingredients that you selected, you know, their own pigments and what game that they're going to play in both the appreciation, not only from a taste perspective, but also from a visual one, right?
Yeah, and I think that that's such a huge part of eating, and why we are attracted to food. And you know, people say you eat with your eyes first, and sort of that's your first sort of thing that you are drawn to. And so trying to find colors and ingredients that would melt together, and sort of the instructions as well to sort of add this like blueberry puree, which changes into really like purpley sort of like the beautiful mixture, to just add it sort of like gradually into the base, into the egg white and cream base, so you can really get those folds and see all those like undulating swirls and movements, instead of sort of like mixing it all together. So it's more like a delicate process. And yeah, just sort of try to keep that in mind in order to like evoke the best sort of like most of like the movement that we see in the video. Which I think it's really important to keep in mind.
Yeah.
I think one thing that, like, when Imogen and I were talking about this collaboration, we both were very excited about creating like a visual feast, and how your eyes could lick a color, or really taste the rainbow. And it's something that, you know, I guess to pull back from any art speak or jargon, it's a fundamental idea of playing. And I think that both Imogen and I play very hard in our respective kitchens or studios, and it's having that childlike sense of inventiveness and curiosity, and also just mischievousness with color, and not taking it too seriously, especially in the production process. Yeah, that was fun.
I think that's a really wonderful thing you just said about play and, you know, not taking things too seriously, because I mean, Imogen, I excuse the pun, but I glazed over your background. But I mean, you were previously, I mean, you trained as a Michelin-starred chef, right? You're working in like the top kitchens in New York, where we've chatted beforehand about your use of tweezers, right? And there's this dogmatic precision, and then you're like, you know what, I'm going to get more creative with this. I'm going to be more playful. And in essence, I mean, that's completely it. I love, you know, that point that Dawn just made. I mean, you've hit the nail on the head, right?
Yeah, and I think playful is nice because it gives you because I think that if you're too like focused and sort of cut off and not seeing or not giving yourself any leeway or wiggle room, and everything's quite regimented, then it inhibits your creativity too. I mean, like, yes, like you can thrive in a Michelin star, very sort of like everything's like very organized and that kind of thing, but in the end, I felt like having that training and then stepping away from it was actually better in terms of like what kind of work you create that suits your personality, what feels more like you. And now that you have these certain like technical skills, and you can step away from them and be playful and sort of and sort of go with your instinct instead of always like following a rule. So yeah, I think it's definitely sort of more like speaks to, you know, like your personality and sort of like how you want to shift and like they change your work.
Absolutely. And this makes me think, and maybe makes you think as well, Dawn, what about art school? I mean, I'm just thinking back to the period of time that I spent, once again, bringing back to like Hong Kong, and I was working with a number of artists from mainland China. And, you know, the art school process there, you know, you went to Hangzhou or, you know, Academy of Fine Arts over in Beijing. It was, you learn exactly how to do things. And, you know, God forbid you should deviate and go do something else. But then when something really interesting came up, was because that artist had learned those skills and was like, yes, I see you, but I'm going to go create something else, which can be very different from a Western art school tradition. So I was wondering, maybe you could share with us a little bit more about how you got into art making and what has been your personal experience.
Well, I went to Georgetown University, and I spent a bit of time at UCL London as well, Slade School of Fine Art. So I double majored in English, writing, and fine art. So it was like a foot in each boat. I actually spent all my time in that art school painting, oil painting. And once I left, I never picked up an oil painting brush again.
No way.
Yes, I mean, it's been and I've just only in my practice started now with the residue paintings, touching it again. But again, there are no brushes, and it's almost, it took me that long to finally revisit something that I was almost honing like a craftsmanship skill at. Yeah, and I think, you know, both things are really important. I mean, there's so much value in being trained, I'm sure, Imogen, in a Michelin-starred restaurant, to understand structure, to understand discipline, to understand what it means to achieve that level of perfection. And then yet you need to counterbalance that with being able to completely let go. And I think as I go on in my practice, in my work, I'm better able to kind of almost be very schizophrenic about the two, and knowing when I have to lean on one versus the other. And I can't see them the work will never be as strong if they did not have the tension between the two, always pulling and forcing it to be bigger and better and, you know, deeper. Yeah.
It's so interesting that you bring up the word tension, because so the works that have been brought together for this current iteration of AORA is around storytelling, right? And I actually didn't completely realize that you had studied English and writing beforehand. And the room in which this particular work is in was thinking about, you know, when you approach maybe a poem for the first time, or you approach a book, or you even hear someone telling you a story, you don't necessarily listen to every single word or pay attention to every single comma. What you're left with is a feeling, right? And those feelings might change, and sometimes you run through things, and there's an immediate impression that comes out of it. And thinking about that, on the other hand, as opposed to maybe another, and that's kind of maybe a more, I think of an emulsion, like a warm, frothy feeling, as opposed to another one where there's quite a clear-cut sequence of events, and it can be quite tough. And there's this whole spectrum of storytelling, or how you tell stories. And actually last week we had a virtual gathering, which was precisely that, the tensions of storytelling. So you've got these tensions of storytelling, which are running throughout the show, and then are then coming back to your work, and then both of your precise practices, which is personally a connection I had not made personally beforehand. And I think that's really interesting to think about. And I guess another thing was, I was thinking about painting, because now I'm looking at this still of your video. I don't know if anyone has been to the Tate Britain before, or has spent time with, you know, Turner paintings beforehand, but if I just dip into particular corners, you know, I just think of a sky under its myriad of, you know, various, you know, variations. I guess this is a question for you, Dawn. I mean, yes, you had this background in painting, but maybe it's not painters that you've been inspired by. Are there any particular authors, or is it more that your reference points come from nature, or is it an amalgamation?
Definitely an amalgamation. I think I'm very promiscuous in, you know, I love Helen Frankenthaler as much as I like David Shrigley, and that's just it. Like, I think they both have their value, and both make very poignant work.
Yeah.
I definitely, because of my English writing background, have a ton of authors that I love, and, you know, for someone that's very contemporary, I think Miranda July is someone that I think is hilarious and fresh and funny. So on the funny note, it would be David Sedaris.
Mm-hmm.
Oh yeah, he's funny.
I read his book so really recently, which was incredible. I think that's his latest book, and he's like one of those like writers who makes you laugh out loud, like if you're reading it on the tube or something. And yeah,
because it's so true. It's based on that trigger of truth, and that's why it's so highly relatable. And yeah, I mean, this is pulling it back to probably a more universal point of view. It's that regardless of whether it's literature or a painting or a film, it's that universality that really lands in someone and really transfers from one person, say from the creator to the audience, that I think is amazing when it works well in a piece of art.
I think also humor is really important. I think that I mean, it kind of travels from what we were talking about, playfulness, but humor is something slightly more distinct. You know, humor is you laugh, you chuckle. And I think it's something that, I mean, personally, I think I have a ridiculous sense of humor. I like to laugh. And I know Imogen likes to laugh as well. And I think it's something that sometimes when it comes to the world of art, or when it comes to the world of food, it can sometimes be a little bit missed. And I'm also, you know, Benny, who you know is the co-founder of AORA, you know, he's an architect, and humor I think sometimes can also be missed there as well, because it's, you know, a set of parameters, and so on so forth. And maybe you could tell us a little bit more about what role humor can, or what role does humor play for you in art, or even like get beyond the art, you as a human being.
I think, you know what, well, at least at my studio, we're just a very small team of probably 4 people right now. We're always laughing. There's always you know, no one is spared from being ridiculed. Like, sometimes you have meetings where you say no one has a stupid idea. We're full of stupid ideas, and we're always paying for them and suffering for them. And I think that's what it just keeps you grounded. You know, like you just can't believe your own bullshit sometimes. Buy too much into your own bullshit. You have to laugh. You have to realize, like, maybe that's just a block of ice. I spent 3 years photograph freezing a block of ice. Like, you're just making your own problems and trying to solve them at the end, creatively solve them. And yeah, I personally, it's something that we just dig deep our heels into humor and just like not take ourselves too seriously. And I found it always very helpful, and it also allows you not to be so uptight to the point that you can't separate your ego from the work. I think that's very important, to be light-footed in that way, that you can step outside. Yes, you made the work, yes, you put all of yourself in the work, but you are not the work. You can step aside and laugh sometimes. And I hope I always can hold on to that and not forget what I'm saying right now.
Oh my gosh, completely. But I also think what you know, it's amazing what you're saying about, you know, what you're laughing. It's not, I mean, it can be you as well, but you've got a studio, right? You've got a team. And I think of even us, you know, within AORA, who are sharing different things. Sometimes things will go right. Other times things will go wrong. Sometimes there's like a borderline of a tear. And then other times it's like, relax. What you're doing is creating a virtual gallery that's on the internet. Like, put things in perspective. But I think one thing that is important is that it's about community, right? So people come together around something, and the way that they will come together around looking at something and observing it and sharing in on that beauty, they will also come around that instinctive burst of laughter, or they'll come around a meal and, you know, share in on something dessert. And it's about the different points that connect other people, and how it's not just what you say, it's maybe how you experience things, right? Whether it comes back to communication, actually. And, you know, one of the points, you know, for this current show in AORA was that if you look into the psychological statistical facts, when you're communicating, roughly only 7% is what you say. Isn't that insane? That is such an insane scientific fact. Beyond that, it's the way you say it, the way you gesticulate, the way you present what you see, or like even like random reactions you might have, you know, from laughter or to, this tastes delicious, you know, and those are all forms of communication. And Imogen, you've spoken about the relationship between food and communication, right? I know this is something that's quite important for you. You know, you see it as not just something that you eat, right? It's a way of telling something.
Yeah, and I was also kind of laughing when Dawn was saying, like, oh, did I really spend 3 years like photographing a block of ice? Because I sometimes feel that way, because, you know, I work with food and I take that very seriously, and I think that it means more than just eating something or satisfying you or keeping you alive and like all that kind of thing. And it's a universal, like everyone has to eat. And so I really sort of want to sort of bring out the potential of it to communicate a concept and sort of like comprehension through consumption. But other times I'm just like, oh my God, have I really, like, how much time have I spent thinking about like a piece of meat or like an orange, and like what kind of orange it is and where it came from and like what the texture of the zest is and like what, you know, what its branch looks like when it's attached to the tree.
What
like,
branch looks like.
Yeah, just sort of like laughing about that. But but I think that, yeah, in terms of communicating and being able to, as Jem was saying, like see what someone's doing like that. I think whenever I have an in-person event and you actually, or even have people over for dinner, like that's the moment that you're waiting for, which is like when someone takes like their first bite and they get it, or they're surprised, or they're confused, or they're like, you know, you obviously want to feed them something delicious, but you also want them to understand like why you made it and what you're trying to, like what idea you're trying to convey. And it's funny how like you know, you can spend ages working on something, like hours cooking a dish, and then it's all gone. It just, you know, just takes one bite to experience, which is just like such a fleeting, ephemeral experience. And yeah, it just goes away in like one, like, you know, 1 second. But yeah, I think all of that sort of in terms of taste and seeing people's like physical reactions and trying to read their emotions, like sort of, and how even they use their hands to eat something, sort of like all that sort of like comes together in a dining experience. So
I think there's something quite beautiful that you said there, where you'll take all this time in, you know, preparing something, and then you take one bite and you're like, oh, there it's gone. Like, and it comes back. We're kind of looping back into, you know, what we were saying when Dawn was so beautifully describing, you know, your work, right? Your video work, where it's about how it can be languorous, right? It can take so much time, and then all of a sudden it can just be a little sparkle, a little snippet. But then what remains, right, is the fact that it was you interacting with it, right? And as a result, it's the memory you might develop with it. You know, you have that moment of, oh, that was so tedious, right? Or, oh, that was so beautiful, or that was delicious, or that was exciting, right? And I think it's just so important, because like encountering a work of art, in the same way as like maybe having something to eat, it's that someone has spent so much time and effort and thought on, you carry it with you, right? So, you know, right now we're having this conversation, really connecting people from 3 different continents, right? It's an hour, but I know that I'm going to go off and be processing it for, you know, some time to come afterwards, right? So I think that there is that moment of lag, which is quite beautiful as well, or just like the imprint, right? The imprint on an everyday life, yeah. But thinking about the future in the context of time, I was wondering, Dawn, whether maybe you could share with us a little bit on what you're working on at the moment. You know, for those of you who received our newsletter, you'll know that Dawn has a show that's going to be opening in January at Sullivan and Strumpf. That in Singapore, I should mention, because right, there's Singapore and Sydney. But maybe you could tell us a little bit more what you're up to, what you're working on. You're in your beautiful studio right now, which I feel so privileged being able to see. We were joking before the call started that it's just like the most interesting backdrop out of all of us.
Okay, well, okay, so I have that solo show that everything is clamoring together for January. And I guess the one thing that's truly exciting about that show opening is that we're actually taking it out of the gallery and bringing it to an old shipping warehouse. And there's so much synergy with the idea of time passing through that building. Is now being abandoned and it's ready for gentrification. And the work, which is all about holding on to time and creating these residues, be it in film or photography or in paintings. And the second thing that I'm working on, also opening in January, is a solo presentation of a work that I did in 2018 called Perfect Stranger. Mm-hmm. And that so really has to do with, I guess, an examination of time held between 2 people. Actually, it was me and a psychologist I barely knew. And she's actually moved back to Israel since then. And it was a dialogue that we had over the course of a year. So every single day she would ask me a question and I would respond. And the whole idea was to create a sort of a narrative time capsule of that year. And when it was shown both in Singapore and Sydney, it was always, the gallery was never big enough to hold all 61 works because they actually lie prostrate on the floor. And I've always wanted that experience of viewing. I mean, they're all text-based work, so they're large pieces of G-clay print with text and also gradient color on it. So overall, when you look at it standing up, it feels like an undulating sea of shades and tones with words reflected. But it's always very important for me that I wanted experience to be seen while you're looking down at your feet. I think there's such humility with work that is not confrontational. The experience of absorbing something or meeting something is very different when it's right in front of your face versus something that you naturally bow your head down to look at. And also, I mean, the work literally has no framing, no glass, no acrylic perspex over it. So it's just resting at your feet. And we're going to recreate that, but in a huge museum hall, which I'm really excited about. So that's what is cooking.
That was amazing. Oh my gosh. I want travel restrictions to be lifted, and I'll just like fly over, or barring that, like, smuggle my way in. But I think something that was really quite beautiful, certain words, I don't know if it was on purpose, but the word experience. I think that that's something that, we're thinking about a lot in the art world. And I think it's something that, maybe, food as well, especially the fact that also, Imogen, you're not just a chef, you're a food designer, right? So you're thinking about how do we make this all encompassing, right? Which comes back to this activation of the senses that we're talking about. And the other thing the other term you used that was really touching for me was absorbing. And I like this idea that it's not just something that, just floats off your skin, right? Or just skims your eyes, right? It's something that you sort of take in and it seeps in, like whether it be the humidity when you step out into Singapore air, or, the cold when you step out, here in the UK. And there's something about that because it makes you at one with what you're encountering, right? You're not just a passing random vessel. You think of other things that absorbs, like sponges, right? Or kids when they're learning a language at a young age. And these are all beautiful things, right? Which make up you. So I think that those are two words that really, really, really resonated with me. And there's the third element, which is coming back to the physicality which we're talking about, and is the fact that it's at your feet, and this idea of humility. And I think it also comes back to what we're saying about this status building and this playfulness, whether it be with art or whether it be with food. And it just kind of like, wait, but where, what allows us to be viewing it? It's our feet. It's the fact that we can stand. It's the fact that, that groundedness that you were describing. I think it's really, it's very special. And I really feel it, like on a physical level, even though, I'm not there to see them directly, but, I can. But also absorbing, that happens, you think of that all the time in cooking as well, right?
Yeah.
How is it going to soak it in? How is it going to take it in? How is it going to meld?
Yeah, exactly. I mean, also, like when you're eating something and ingesting something, it really becomes
true, right? Most basic, yeah.
You have to think about like the way your fingertips will touch something. It's if and the process of eating it. And so I'm always trying to keep that in mind as well. I mean, I'm a big fan of having people like touch everything and like with their hands, which isn't really in the COVID times is not ideal. I think somebody might
get away.
Get in there and eat it, and everyone's like, no, like you really have to step away from that. So yeah, it's just trying to find ways, like sort of every aspect of eating, like you need to sort of keep into account, even the way something sounds, or like if you have a cracker and the way it breaks, sort of like all of that sort of it makes the makes the experience like special and needs to be sort of like accounted for essentially.
Yeah, I'm just thinking once again about going on with absorption. This is really not a term that I often use, so I'm just going to bring it. But when we were designing AORA, in case you stepped into the space, we were playing with all like the textures of the walls, or the way that the light falls, or the balance of the sound when you walk in with this bespoke piece of music. And when Benny and I have been speaking about what inspired us for this space, or for each of the exhibitions, they're going to be different each time. We were thinking of places like Naoshima, Dia Beacon, Yorkshire Sculpture Park, where there's this melding of art, space, and context. And actually what I think it comes down to is that they're balanced and they mutually absorb each other. I don't know, like the space absorbs the art, but the art is absorbed in the space and into the context, and it's like this beautiful melting goo. I don't know. It's a beautiful little mixture, and I think, you know, that's what we've been trying to achieve. And I never thought of that term, but Dawn, you've sparked it. You know, thinking about it in those terms, so it kind of seeps, and now it's really going to stick with me. See, this is one of the things I'm going to carry with me for the rest of the day. It's going to ruminate, you know, up here, but also, I mean, not deviating too much in terminology, but I think what's also really interesting, what you're talking about, is this collaboration with a psychologist, right? And, you know, with someone who's thinking about the mind and the processing of emotion and so on and so forth. And actually, you know, it really made me think about the way that we've been approaching the curation of AORA. You know, what not many people know is that, you know, in a very, 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 very past iteration, we were given a private collection to play with, and we were trying to play with it, and it was really not sticking, because it was coming at things from an overly cerebral point of view. It was like, ooh, art from the north of England, yay, or, you know, art from China, yay. And I was like, you know what, I'm sorry, but when you're faced with an artwork from the first time, especially an artist you don't know from the first time, you're not going, oh, tick, you know, let's take someone we all know, Rothko. The first time you look at a Rothko, you're not going, oh, tick, 1960s abstract expressionist artist. Oh, tick, you know, Clement Greenberg had a bunch of stuff to say about him. You're going, do I like this? Do I feel it? And I remember the first time I came across your work, I was like, wow, I'm like, I love it. And, you know, it doesn't mean that it's any less valid. It's actually just reorientating and repivoting the way that we approach things, and that what we strike collaborations, right, within ourselves, but also whether it be a psychologist, it's that train of thought, right, that origin of feeling and thought, and tuning in with it, which I think is just so important. And I actually did not know about this, you know, this future work that you're going to be re-showing again in Singapore, and it just, once again, it just points to alignment completely. I'm so excited for you. That's going to be really beautiful. I can't wait to see pictures.
Yes, I'll send them across. I'll share them.
Yay! I'm noting that we've got about 7 minutes left, not to be overly Swiss and pedantic about timings, but conscious, you know, we all have either days or evenings to get on with. But I was wondering whether people had any questions, whether they wanted to pipe in. If not, I've got one in the back of my mind, as always. No. Okay. I wanted to touch on, just not to close things off, but to kind of bring it back full circle with something that you were saying at the start. And maybe this links into psychology, but you brought up femininity. And I think that's something quite interesting in the sense, I mean, this is completely at random, you know, the fact that then, you know, then Imogen also happens, you know, to be, you know, a female food designer and chef. I didn't think of it, like, I just, anyway, and we've been 3 women having this chat, but what does femininity look like? And perhaps even better, like, what does it feel like to you, for you, for you?
I find it hard to answer that question, because it is just who I am, or what I am, and I don't know a reality beyond my own reality. So I've never thought about, although I can refer to a color as feminine, I've never thought about that genderization within, I guess, my practice, or message or concept that I was trying to bring across. Yeah.
I think that's interesting, this idea of like a color, the femininity of color, because I definitely do have the same thing. I was like, ooh, this feels like soft, or this or so, and then I think of language. It's just to spin it back, you know, I grew up speaking English, but also Spanish and French, and you know, in these languages there is that you know, la quelque chose, or une, or una, or and I think that was a very, very curious, quite sensitive question, which I wanted to ask you. But Yeah, I think that, we've got a question from Tola. Thank you, Tola. She's asking, hi, Dawn. Thank you for sharing your new work. Do you see meditation as a connection between this and the walking meditation around Perfect Stranger?
Yes. Yes. Not, of course, not in a way that it's not in a lateral way, but more in a way that I think what I've always tried to play with or pull out from the viewer or the audience or whoever is receiving the work is this ability for them to hold time. I mean, the words like hover or suspend come to my mind, and it's the ability to sit with time and not to rush, not to race forward, not to pull back, but to just stay still, to hold still. So for both that, and meditation, I think to Tola's point, it really is a discipline or an entire education and a practice in doing that in almost a quasi, definitely a spiritual way. I don't feel my work is, I wouldn't go to say that it's spiritual, but definitely I've been always trying to pull the person who receives it back into that space. Yeah.
I think that there was something what really resonated there. What you were saying was that this discipline, right? And what you were describing, bringing it, the relationship between discipline and then also being able to stand still. Because, if you think you were saying for 3 years working on this block of ice, right? That's disciplined. It's like this, I'm going to keep on going. Or, if you're Imogen and you're perfecting that recipe and you just keep on going. Or I think of us like equally keeping on trying to make, AORA better and better. And while on the other hand, also thinking about being present and slowness, right? So trying to keep going while also, remaining and finding that punctuation. That's interesting.
I think that's always a moment where you are simply in the flow of something. And a lot of times we find that with, some of us find it with our jobs when we're really, at Imogen, maybe when you're really like in the kitchen firing something up, you're just flowing. You're just not really thinking about past and present. You're just thinking about now, and you're creating and you're acting on the spot. And outside of that, I think, some films, some pieces of music allow you to flow as well. They allow you to just hold time in that way. And I mean, with those two works that Tola brought up, yes, like I think it's about, trying to get someone to flow with the text, flow with the color, flow with the visual, and not be racing back and forth, thinking about, okay, so color falls, what's the next color? It's just, you're there, it's happening live for you and with you. And to your point about what AORA is created on, is kind of bringing people back to a single moment. Yeah,
I think that's beautiful. And it was a word that did not come up beforehand, but when you think of even how everything has come about from an initial discussion of AORA, or how we started collaborating with Imogen, or how we started collaborating with you, or how we've just been here right now, or even just to viewing your work, where literally there are these drips and these flows. I think you just found the word and the feeling, not only to mention the motion, that galvanizes all of this once again. So I'm going to be thinking of that now moving forward. But I just wanted to say, thank you so much, Dawn, for opening up your studio to us and showing us in your background, and, for sharing about your practice and your work. It has been an honor and a pleasure. And thank you, Imogen, for creating such a beautiful dish in response to Dawn's work. I'm going to go off and try to make it later today. I am a terrible sweet cook. like probably one of the worst you'll ever meet. But I live with someone who is an incredible wife cook. So what she doesn't know yet is that they're going to get to make it. But thank you so much to everyone who's joined us here this evening or today. And, you know, let this not be the last time that we connect. And, you know, and please visit AORA, look up Dawn's work, discover what Imogen creates outside of AORA. It's incredibly beautiful and transformative. And hope to see you all very soon in real life as well as virtually.
Yes. Thank you.
Thank you. Bye.